She was the uncrowned queen, controlling every breath in the neighborhood. She never knew that the humble man she despised held her very destiny in his hands. A small mistake, an arrogant penalty, and everything would crumble. You won't believe who truly owns this place. Don't miss what happens next when this power game completely flips. Too many sports cars in this luxury neighborhood. Do you understand? Lucas Brandt. Cheryl Whitmore's voice didn't just echo, it shredded the morning's fragile peace. A thunderclap from an unseen storm. The HOA meeting room instantly transformed into an arena, and Lucas, sitting ramrod straight across from her, was the sole target of every searing gaze. He, a man barely into his 30s with a perpetually disheveled mop of hair and an outfit so unassuming it bordered on camouflage, seemed utterly unfazed by the inferno raging before him. Outside, the June sun still spilled golden onto manicured lawns, but within these walls, the air grew thick with tension, a suffocating premonition of a coming tempest. Cheryl Whitmore wasn't merely an HOA manager. She was an uncrowned empress, a self-appointed deity who had twisted this tranquil community into her personal fiefdom. With her perfectly coiffed bob, a power suit so crisp it seemed tailored from granite, and eyes that could slice through steel. She was infamous for her obsessive control. From the precise shade of a fence to a dog's bark after curfew, nothing escaped her tyrannical gaze. But Lucas Brandt, with his casual demeanor and enigmatic life, was the largest thorn in Cheryl's meticulously crafted rose garden. He didn't flaunt wealth, shun social gatherings, and most unforgivably, refused to bow to her unspoken decrees. To Cheryl, Lucas was an insolent anomaly, a living embodiment of defiance, threatening the perfect order she had so painstakingly imposed. "You have brazenly violated Article 7, Section C regarding parking regulations," Cheryl snarled, her slender hands slamming down on the stack of documents. Each thud, a hammer blow driving nails into Lucas's perceived defiance. "I've received countless complaints about too many sports cars appearing at your property. This community is an exclusive enclave, not a public parking lot for anonymous rental vehicles." Her eyes, narrowed to slits, raked over Lucas with undisguised contempt. She endlessly reiterated her duty to maintain the caliber of the neighborhood at any cost. Lucas, meanwhile, maintained a small, enigmatic smile, a smirk of defiance that Cheryl interpreted as pure insolence. He knew those cars weren't his. They belonged to a high-end chauffeuring service he'd privately arranged for several elderly residents who struggled with mobility. One of many initiatives Cheryl, in her arrogant blindness, knew nothing about. "Forgive me, Ms. Whitmore." Lucas finally interjected, his voice so calm it felt like a deliberate insult against her fury. "But I believe there's a misunderstanding. Those vehicles are part of a shuttle service I've personally arranged for some of the senior residents here." Cheryl let out a sharp, brittle cackle, a laugh devoid of humor, echoing hollowly through the room. "Lucas Brandt, who do you take me for? A shuttle service? Are you attempting to spin a fairy tale to justify those expensive cars? Do you truly believe we'll accept that a humble investor like yourself is that charitable?" Her eyes blazed with suspicion and scorn. "No, I believe you are circumventing the rules, and I will not allow that to happen in my dominion." She pushed her spectacles up her nose, her gaze sweeping across the hushed, curious neighbors, then declared with an imperious tone that left no room for dissent. "Therefore, I have decided, based on Article 9, Section E, concerning disruptive behavior and depreciation of community value, we will be doubling your HOA fees, effective immediately." Not a flicker of shock registered on Lucas's face. He merely held that same enigmatic smile, a confidence bordering on serenity. "Doubling, you say?" he asked, his voice so even it infuriated Cheryl further. "Precisely," she snapped, her face flushed crimson. "This is a deterrent. I want you to understand that no one is permitted to destabilize the order I have established here. No one," Cheryl gestured imperiously to her timid young secretary, who was practically quivering in the corner. "Send a formal warning notice to Lucas Brandt immediately and ensure the notice regarding the doubled HOA fees is dispatched concurrently." The secretary nodded nervously, hastily bending over her papers, avoiding Cheryl's furious glare. Lucas slowly rose to his feet, his eyes no longer holding their initial calm. Instead, a razor-sharp glint appeared, a potent flash of power, like a sword unsheathing in the shadows. His smile widened, no longer enigmatic, but a full, confident declaration. "I just fired you from your position as HOA manager," he stated, each word a hammer blow, reverberating through the room, silencing the eager whispers of the neighbors packed at the door. This HOA building and the entire D8 home community are also owned by me. In that singular moment, Cheryl Whitmore's world imploded. Her face, perpetually taut with self-importance, drained of all color, turning a ghostly white. She froze, her body trembling uncontrollably, her eyes wide with disbelief, staring at Lucas as if he had just transformed into a monstrous entity. A deadly silence fell over the room, broken only by Cheryl's ragged breaths and the collective gasp of astonishment from the stunned residents. The power play had irrevocably shifted, brutally and without warning, leaving the arrogant HOA queen utterly annihilated before the very kingdom she believed she ruled. The silence that now suffocated the HOA meeting room wasn't peaceful. It was the deafening roar of a monumental truth. Not a single curious neighbor peering from the doorway, nor any of the stunned board members frozen in their seats, could reconcile what their ears had just processed. Cheryl Whitmore, the iron-fisted matriarch who had for years wielded fear and demanded unquestioning obedience, now stood there, a trembling leaf caught in an invisible hurricane, her face a ghostly white, her eyes glazed with a void of comprehension. Every ounce of authority, every shred of arrogant self-satisfaction she had ever worn, dissolved like mist under Lucas's calm, yet utterly commanding gaze. Lucas offered no further words. He simply stood, fixed on Cheryl, allowing the raw, brutal truth to echo its own chilling pronouncement. The secretary, Jessica, who had been poised to dispatch the disciplinary notice, dropped her entire stack of papers to the floor with a pathetic flutter, the tiny sound echoing like a gunshot in the oppressive quiet. Mrs. Miller, a sweet elderly resident Cheryl had once fined for overly vibrant hydrangeas, clapped a trembling hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with undisguised awe. Mr. Davies, a retired military officer who had silently seethed under Cheryl's reign but never dared to speak, now pressed his lips into a tight line, a flicker of stunned satisfaction igniting in his gaze. Lucas turned, his movements deliberate, almost ceremonial, and began to walk slowly towards the doorway, where dozens of faces etched with confusion and dawning realization were pressed together. As he approached, the crowd instinctively parted, creating an almost reverent pathway. The whispers had vanished, replaced by a collective held breath, an unspoken anticipation of something grander about to unfold. Lucas met no one's eye, he simply walked, and as he passed, every gaze was fixed on him, no longer with suspicion or contempt, but with a profound, almost reverential astonishment. This was the man they had dismissed, the one Cheryl had publicly humiliated, and now he stood revealed as their undisputed sovereign. As Lucas stepped out of the meeting room, his eyes settled on a sleek, obsidian Maybach idling silently at the curb. Not just one, but three identical vehicles lined the pavement leading up to the HOA building. These were the cars he had leased, the very ones that had sparked Cheryl's outrage. But they were no ordinary vehicles. They were the latest models, with tinted windows that concealed their opulent interiors. An impeccably uniformed chauffeur stepped out, opening the rear door for Lucas. Several neighbors, still lingering, witnessed the scene, and hushed murmurs, no longer venomous but filled with sheer disbelief, began to ripple through the gathering. Lucas slid into the plush leather seat. He pulled out his phone, not to make a call, but to check a single message. It had been sent mere moments ago, right after his earth-shattering declaration. Back inside the meeting room, Cheryl finally found her voice, though it was nothing more than a ragged, desperate whisper. No, no, it can't be. She stumbled, clutching her chest, her carefully constructed facade shattering like glass. You're lying. You're just a small-time investor. This entire community. It belongs to Harmony Property Management. I've worked with them for 10 years. She spun to face Jessica, her face contorted in a desperate plea. Jessica, tell them Harmony is the owner. Not him. Jessica, still visibly trembling, stammered, Ms. Whitmore. And an email just came through from Harmony's legal department. They say controlling shares have been transferred and a new executive director has been appointed, Lucas Brand. Her voice was barely audible, her eyes darting away from Cheryl's desperate gaze, like a physical blow. Jessica's words demolished Cheryl's last vestiges of delusion. She reeled backward, stumbling into the table, then collapsed into a chair, utterly drained of all strength. The entire community, the 48 homes she had ruled with an iron fist, along with the very HOA building where she had reigned supreme, now belonged to the unassuming man she had just publicly scorned. Cheryl had always believed she held absolute power, an unshakable force. She had built her empire on fear and rigid rules, confident that no one would dare challenge her. She had cemented her position by constantly belittling others, especially Lucas, whom she saw as a subtle threat to her dominion. But she had committed a fatal error. She had never considered that a man of Lucas's humble appearance could be an insidious force, a shark cloaked in sheep's wool. She had failed to delve deeper into Harmony Property Management, the very company she had supposedly worked with for a decade. She didn't know that Harmony was merely one of dozens of shell companies Lucas had painstakingly established, a complex web designed to obscure his true identity, especially during the initial phases of the community acquisition. This wasn't a sudden hostile takeover. This was a meticulously planned operation, orchestrated by Lucas years ago, gradually acquiring each home, each parcel of land, until the entire community was firmly within his grasp. Inside the Maybach, Lucas was already moving forward. A voice crackled through his Bluetooth earpiece. Mr. Brandt, your counsel, Mr. Peterson, is standing by. Lucas nodded. Good, and let's proceed. I want a thorough audit of all Cheryl Whitmore's financial records, especially any dubious expenditures, and every arbitrary regulation she unilaterally imposed, causing undue hardship to residents, needs to be rescinded immediately. He had planned for this moment for a long time. Cheryl had abused her power, grown too tyrannical, and it was time to end her reign. Lucas wasn't doing this out of personal vengeance, but because he genuinely wanted to transform this community into a truly livable place, unburdened by irrational rules and oppressive control. He looked out the window. The neighbors were still there, watching his car. They were no longer merely curious bystanders, but witnesses to history, a spectacular reversal of power. The story of Lucas Brandt and Cheryl Whitmore would become a legend in this neighborhood. The Maybach glided smoothly along the pristine asphalt roads, leaving the community behind. Lucas closed his eyes, thinking of his early days here, a young man with a vast vision. He had bought the first house under a different name, then gradually, through his intricate web of shell companies, he had quietly acquired each home, each plot, each asset. He had patiently waited, cloaked in his unassuming facade, enduring the whispers, the dismissive glances from those around him, especially from Cheryl. He had allowed himself to be a minor inconvenience, an easy target for Cheryl to exert her control, all for the larger purpose to expose her true nature to the entire community. He had offered no reaction to her attacks, her baseless penalties. He had let Cheryl sink deeper into the mire of her own power, ensuring that when the truth was finally revealed, the shock would be all the more profound. Lucas opened his eyes. I want everything handled with the utmost professionalism and transparency, he instructed his chauffeur, who listened intently through the rearview mirror. There's no room for personal vendetta, only for fairness and genuine improvement for the community. Back in the HOA building, Chaos had erupted. Cheryl Whitmore had truly collapsed. Jessica, the secretary, frantically called for an ambulance, while some of the HOA board members, once Cheryl's loyal enforcers, exchanged terrified glances. They knew Cheryl's empire had crumbled, and their own futures hung precariously in the balance. The neighbors outside, initially murmuring, now engaged in excited, animated debates. They couldn't believe their unassuming neighbor was the true owner of the entire community. Amazement had morphed into respect, tinged with a healthy dose of apprehension. They wondered how their lives would change under the leadership of Lucas Brandt. Some began to recall Lucas's small acts of kindness, the times he had quietly helped them without seeking recognition, the unnoticed good deeds he had performed for the community. Meanwhile, the corporate lawyer representing the owning entity had arrived at Harmony Property Management's headquarters, the very place Cheryl had conducted much of her business. The lawyer, with a stern demeanor and professional efficiency, had begun the takeover process. He demanded all records and documents related to the community, especially agreements with the HOA and Cheryl Whitmore. The information began to spread like wildfire. Not just within the community, but throughout the real estate world. News of Lucas Brandt, a mysterious young investor who had acquired an entire luxury residential community, and how he did it, was sending shockwaves. Cheryl Whitmore, once known as a notorious HOA manager for her rigid control, now became a cautionary tale of hubris and the inevitable fall from unchecked power. Simultaneously, the luxurious car service chauffeurs, whom Lucas had initially hired for the residents and who had witnessed the entire dramatic exchange, received new directives from Lucas. Instead of merely shuttling elderly residents, they would now be part of a new, expanded team, providing convenient and complimentary transportation services for all residents within the community. This was one of the first immediate changes Lucas wanted to implement, a symbolic gesture of the paradigm shift in the community's management. It wasn't just about providing a service. It was about rebuilding trust and fostering a true community where everyone felt valued and supported. Lucas's revelation wasn't just a shock to Cheryl, it was an awakening for the entire community. They had lived too long under Cheryl's shadow, accepting unreasonable rules and autocratic control. Now they realized they had a different leader, one they had never suspected. A man of humble appearance who nevertheless possessed immense power and a genuine vision. This was a new beginning, a new chapter for the residential community. And for Cheryl Whitmore, it was the definitive end of an empire built on deception and the abuse of power. In the raw aftermath of Lucas's earth-shattering revelation, the quiet neighborhood rippled with a seismic shockwave, each tremor radiating outwards, destabilizing every preconceived notion. Cheryl Whitmore had been rushed to the hospital, but it was a psychological collapse, far deeper than any physical injury, that consumed her. She lay in a sterile white room, her eyes vacant, fixed on the ceiling, unable to process the brutal fact that her carefully constructed life, her absolute dominion, had been ripped from her, utterly, in front of the very community she had so arrogantly controlled. News of the HOA Queen's fall spread like wildfire, not just within the manicured confines of the neighborhood, but beyond, reaching the ears of countless past victims who now savored a bittersweet, almost vengeful sense of vindication. While Cheryl grappled with her shattering reality, Lucas Brandt moved with the quiet, inexorable force of a tide. That afternoon, as his Maybach glided back into the community, no one dared to meet his gaze with suspicion or contempt. Instead, eyes followed him, a mixture of intense curiosity, profound respect, and a palpable, newfound apprehension. Neighbors huddled in hushed tones, desperately trying to piece together the unbelievable mosaic of this unfolding drama. They recalled Lucas's unassuming presence, his silent endurance of Cheryl's venomous barbs. They remembered his quiet acts of kindness, the unasked-for repairs to old Mr. Smith's leaky roof, the unheralded drives to Miss Evans's doctor's appointments. These small, overlooked gestures, once obscured by Cheryl's arrogance and their own casual indifference, now blazed with a new revelatory light, painting a portrait of a man utterly unlike the one they thought they knew. Attorney Peterson, a silver-haired man whose stern demeanor belied the keen intelligence in his eyes, had already descended upon the HOA building like a legal storm. He arrived flanked by a retinue of assistants and forensic accountants. The meeting room, once Cheryl's personal throne room, was now the sterile operating theater for a corporate autopsy. Every single record, from property deeds to HOA expense reports, was meticulously scrutinized. Every line item, every numerical entry, every signature was examined with ruthless precision. Immediately, the festering anomalies began to surface. Dubious expenditures, service contracts signed with phantom companies from which Cheryl directly or indirectly profited, arbitrary fines, and capriciously imposed regulations were all meticulously documented. When Lucas returned, Peterson had a preliminary report ready, a thick file thudding onto the polished table. "Mr. Brandt," the lawyer began, his voice devoid of emotion, "the situation is far more intricate than we initially believed. Cheryl Whitmore didn't merely abuse her power. We have uncovered substantial evidence of embezzlement and large-scale fraud. She systematically leveraged the HOA's authority for personal gain, inflating the costs of maintenance and repair contracts, siphoning off funds through illegitimate service fees." Neat, Peterson pointed to several highlighted lines in the document. For instance, the monthly landscaping fee was artificially inflated by 200% over the last 3 years, while the actual quality of service demonstrably plummeted. Where did that money go? Lucas listened, his gaze piercing the numbers, each figure a silent testament to betrayal. "I want everything exposed, without compromise," he stated, his voice a low, resolute rumble that filled the room. "No cover-ups. We won't just remove her. We will unravel everything she has done." Later that very afternoon, an emergency resident meeting was abruptly convened. Notifications buzzed through the automated messaging system Lucas had installed long ago but rarely used. Word spread like wildfire. In the HOA meeting room, now stripped of its oppressive aura, was packed to overflowing with eager, anxious residents. The air was charged with a mixture of apprehension and electrified anticipation. When Lucas entered, a reverent silence descended. He wore no opulent attire, still clad in his familiar, unassuming clothes, yet his presence was utterly transformed. He was no longer just a neighbor. He was the owner, the true architect of their destiny. "Good evening, everyone," Lucas began, his voice clear and resonant, needing no microphone. "I know you have many questions, and I am here to answer them all." He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He cut straight to the core. For too long, many of us have endured unreasonable regulations and unjust penalties. We believed it was unavoidable, an inherent part of community living. He paused, his gaze sweeping across each anxious face. "But that is not the truth." Attorney Peterson stepped forward, projecting a series of damning charts and financial statements onto the large screen. "This is what we have uncovered in just a few hours," Peterson declared, meticulously detailing Cheryl's myriad transgressions. Each manipulated number, each fraudulent contract, was laid bare. From the fines collected for Lucas's too many sports cars, which were directly channeled into Cheryl's personal accounts, to inflated pool maintenance contracts signed with relatives' companies at double market rates. A collective gasp, then a simmering rage, began to ripple through the room. Whispers erupted. "I knew it. I told you something was wrong." Cheryl Whitmore was not merely an overzealous HOA manager. Lucas continued, his voice heavy with condemnation. "She exploited her position to embezzle our assets, the HOA fees we honestly paid. She transformed this community into her personal, illegal revenue stream." The truth behind Lucas's luxury car service was clarified by Peterson. Mr. Brandt quietly funded this transportation service to assist elderly residents and those with mobility challenges, entirely at his own expense, completely separate from HOA fees. Peterson explained, and Cheryl Whitmore used this very act of kindness as grounds to penalize him, even attempting to double his HOA fees. This revelation ignited a wave of embarrassed anger and simmering indignation. They had misjudged Lucas, blindly trusting Cheryl's malicious narratives. Peterson then meticulously explained Lucas's intricate ownership structure. Harmony Property Management, which Cheryl Whitmore believed to be the sole owner, is in fact a subsidiary within Lucas Brandt's broader investment group. For years, Mr. Brandt has systematically acquired each home in this community through a carefully constructed network of various shell companies to ensure a smooth, undisturbed acquisition process. Peterson presented undeniable evidence, purchase agreements, deeds of transfer, all legally impeccable and transparent. As the full, unvarnished truth unfolded, the residents' pent-up outrage exploded. Shouts and denunciations against Cheryl filled the room. They felt utterly betrayed, manipulated by the very person they had entrusted with their community's welfare. Several residents rose, sharing their own harrowing tales of arbitrary fines, of the relentless petty tyrannies Cheryl had inflicted upon them. Mrs. Miller, the hydrangea victim, stood, her voice trembling but resolute. She fined me $50 because my hydrangeas were too vibrant. Now I understand it was just another excuse to line her pockets. Lucas let them speak, allowing the cathartic release of their anger and frustration. He knew this was a vital part of the community's healing process. When the emotional tempest finally subsided, Lucas spoke again. I did not do this for personal vengeance. I did this because I believe every one of us deserves to live in a community that is fair, transparent, and built on decency. He paused, his gaze unwavering. As of today, all unreasonable regulations, all unjustified fees are hereby nullified. We will establish a new HOA board, elected by us, operating solely for the benefit of all residents. He then announced his vision for the future. The complimentary shuttle service for all residents will be fully implemented immediately. We will invest in upgrading our infrastructure, enhancing our shared spaces, and organizing community activities to truly bring us together, Lucas promised, his eyes alight with genuine passion. This will not just be a neighborhood. This will be a true family. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Cheryl Whitmore had been diagnosed with acute anxiety disorder and severe nervous collapse, a direct consequence of the overwhelming shock. Her family was informed of the impending charges of embezzlement and fraud. Lucas and Peterson's meticulous investigation had amassed more than enough evidence for criminal prosecution. Cheryl had lost not only her power and standing, but now faced a future riddled with daunting legal battles. News of Cheryl Whitmore's spectacular downfall and public exposure reverberated throughout the real estate world, becoming a stark cautionary tale. Other investors and property managers began to critically reevaluate their own approaches to community interaction. The lesson of unchecked power and the long-game vision of an unassuming investor became a scorching topic of discussion. Back in the neighborhood, the atmosphere had utterly transformed. The shadows of suspicion had lifted, replaced by a cautious trust and blossoming hope. Residents began to envision a brighter future, one where they would no longer live under the oppressive thumb of an autocratic manager. They looked at Lucas, standing calm and confident, and realized they had found an unexpected hero. Lucas was more than just an investor. He was a community builder, an architect of genuine change. The truth, finally laid bare, had cleansed away misunderstandings and prejudices, ushering in a promising new chapter for the entire community. The days that followed Lucas Brandt's public declaration transformed the once stifled community. The air, once thick with unspoken tension and the subtle fear of Cheryl Whitmore's arbitrary rule, now crackled with a palpable sense of liberation and burgeoning possibility. The once rigid pathways of the neighborhood felt lighter. The carefully manicured lawns seemed greener, and the laughter of children echoed with a newfound freedom. Residents, once withdrawn and wary, now exchanged greetings, shared stories, and looked at each other with a glimmer of shared camaraderie, a fragile but growing sense of true community. Lucas, true to his word, immediately began implementing the changes he had promised. The first visible sign was the ubiquitous presence of the luxury Maybachs, no longer a source of suspicion, but a symbol of convenience and care. The dedicated chauffeurs, who had previously operated with an almost covert discretion, now drove openly, picking up and dropping off residents, from elderly individuals needing a ride to the grocery store to teenagers carpooling to after-school activities. The service, completely free of charge, was not just a perk. It was a tangible manifestation of Lucas's vision for a supportive, interconnected community. Residents, who had once grumbled about every penny of their HOA fees, now saw a tangible return on investment, a clear benefit from the newfound transparency. The HOA building itself underwent a swift metamorphosis. The stern, imposing decor that Cheryl had favored was replaced with brighter colors, comfortable seating, and open spaces designed for collaboration. The formidable Rules and Regulations Board that once dominated the main hall was removed, replaced by a simple, welcoming display detailing community events and volunteer opportunities. A provisional committee, comprised of trusted residents like Mrs. Miller, who had volunteered enthusiastically, proudly discussing her now flourishing, vibrant hydrangeas, and Mr. Davies, whose military precision proved invaluable in organizing the new initiatives, was formed to oversee the transition and prepare for the election of a truly resident-elected HOA board. Lucas attended these meetings, not as a dictator, but as a facilitator, offering guidance, resources, and unwavering support, empowering the residents to shape their own future. The audit of Cheryl Whitmore's tenure continued relentlessly. Attorney Peterson's team, now working in close collaboration with federal investigators, uncovered a labyrinthine network of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and fraudulent invoices. The scale of her deception was staggering. Millions of dollars, siphoned from the community's HOA funds over the past decade, were meticulously tracked. Each fabricated contract, each inflated bill, painted a damning picture of systemic abuse and greed. The sheer audacity of her scheme left even seasoned investigators stunned. They found evidence of her tampering with voting records for previous HOA elections, ensuring that only her loyalists or the most complacent individuals secured positions, thus cementing her absolute control. The details were leaked to the media, and Cheryl Whitmore's name became synonymous with corruption and betrayal in local news headlines. Back at the hospital, the news reached Cheryl, delivered in hushed, grave tones by her lawyers. The initial shock had given way to a chilling paranoia, followed by a profound, debilitating depression. The charges against her were overwhelming embezzlement, fraud, and even racketeering. The weight of her exposed crimes, coupled with the public humiliation and the loss of her carefully constructed identity, crushed her spirit. She was no longer the feared HOA queen. She was a woman stripped bare, facing a future behind bars. Her family, once quick to defend her, began to distance themselves, unable to reconcile the public monster with the woman they thought they knew. The power, which had been her oxygen, was gone, and with it, her will to fight. Meanwhile, the ripples of Lucas Brandt's actions extended far beyond the confines of his neighborhood. The real estate community buzzed with the story of the quiet, unassuming investor who had orchestrated a complete, legal, and utterly devastating takeover. His method, a patient, meticulous acquisition strategy veiled by shell companies and a humble public persona, became a case study in strategic investment and long-term vision. Competitors whispered about his brilliance, some with admiration, others with a nervous respect. Lucas, however, remained grounded. He declined most media interviews, preferring to focus on the tangible work of rebuilding the community. The election for the new HOA board was held 6 weeks after Cheryl's downfall. It was a spirited, democratic process, unlike anything the community had ever experienced. Residents actively campaigned, held town halls, and discussed their visions for the future. Lucas, though eligible, chose not to run, stating that his role was as the owner and facilitator, not as a governing body. He wanted the community to truly govern itself. When the votes were tallied, a diverse and passionate group of residents, including Mrs. Miller and Mr. Davies, were elected, all committed to transparency and community welfare. The inaugural meeting of the new board was a stark contrast to the previous ones. It was filled with open discussion, collaborative decision-making, and a genuine desire to serve. One brisk autumn morning, the day Cheryl Whitmore was formally indicted and arrested, a new sign was unveiled at the entrance of the community. It wasn't the old, pretentious signage, but a sleek, modern design. Below the community's name, a simple motto was inscribed: a community built on trust, respect, and shared prosperity. Lucas stood among the residents, watching as the tarp was pulled away. A cheer erupted, heartfelt and unified. He saw Mrs. Miller wiping a tear from her eye, Mr. Davies nodding approvingly, and children playing freely on the newly renovated playground that had been one of the first projects funded by Lucas. The story reached its climactic resolution not with a violent confrontation, but with the quiet, dignified triumph of justice and truth. Cheryl Whitmore's fall was complete. Her reign of terror dissolved into criminal charges and public disgrace. Her name, once synonymous with rigid control, was now a cautionary tale of hubris. Lucas Brandt, the unassuming investor, had not only reclaimed what was rightfully his, but had also liberated an entire community. He had transformed it from a place of fear and resentment into a vibrant, collaborative home. He walked among the residents, no longer an outsider to be judged, but a respected leader, a quiet force who had, through patience and strategic brilliance, brought about a profound and lasting change. The power had truly shifted, not just from one individual to another, but back to the heart of the community itself, where it truly belonged. The final chapter of Cheryl's tyranny was sealed in a courtroom, while a new, brighter narrative for the community was just beginning to be written, one built on the foundations of mutual respect and shared ownership. And so the story of Lucas Brandt and Cheryl Whitmore concludes, a profound lesson on power, humility, and hidden truths. The game is over, and the truth always finds its way. Thank you for joining us on this dramatic journey. Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and leave a comment below so you don't miss out on other captivating stories.